My name is Robert Child, and I'd like to thank Friends of the National World War II Memorial for inviting me to give this presentation on my book, and also I'd like to thank Alex for inviting me. My book is Immortal, Valor, the Black Medal of Honor recipients of World War II, and it was quite a difficult book to write because there wasn't much research on the topic, unfortunately, but that was also a pleasure to do the research as well, to find out about these men's lives. And to start off with, in World War II, when Congress in 1945 was deciding who the deserving recipients of the Medal of Honor might be, more than 1 million black service members served in uniform, but none of them were submitted for consideration for the Medal of Honor, which is quite shocking. Some were recommended, but at the time by their commanders, but none of their names were afforded for consideration. And in 1991, the Department of Defense decided to look into this matter and try to discover the reasons why. And they commissioned a study at Shaw University at that time. It was a 3-year study to determine who might the deserving recipients of the Medal of Honor might be in black service members in World War II. And they selected 9 individuals, almost all who had received the Distinguished Service Cross, and 1 who received the Silver Star. Out of those 9, 7 were finally selected and awarded the Medal of Honor in 1997. So I want to talk about these men now. And our first gentleman, soldier, is Charles Thomas. And he was born in Alabama, and his family moved to Detroit. And he grew up in the inner city. He did very well in his studies and was accepted into college at Wayne University. And also his father was working at the Ford Motor Plant in Dearborn, so he got his son Charles a job there. Charles was in his 3rd year at college when the war broke out, and he was drafted and trained at Battle Creek, basic training. And then in 1942, he was, I would say, fortunate recipient of 2 Defense Department initiatives at that time. One was to train more black officers, and the second one was the new tank destroyer battalions that he was going to become a part of, the 614th. One of the edicts of that new unit was that they have black officers serving in combat. So he was destined to be a combat officer, Charles was, and he took over Company C of the 614th Tank Destroyer Battalion in 1943. And he commanded his company. And the action, I'll fast forward to his action in 1944 of December. They were trying to break through the Sixth Freed line, and Charles was back in the line as part of Task Force Blackshear, and he had 250 men under his command. And it was a foggy morning, and they were below a town called Kleinbach that intelligence reports was held by the 21st Panzer Division, who spent the last 2 years prior under Erwin Rommel in North Africa. So the town was defended by battle-hardened German soldiers, and the tank destroyer unit, Task Force Blackshear, their role was to draw fire, while the infantry and other tanks who got stuck in the mud, would attack the town from the side and the rear. What happened was Charles actually volunteered to enter this valley. Kleinbach was on a hill, and the valley was shrouded in fog. And he went forward and asked his commander if he wanted him to take it. And his commander, Blackshear, said, "Be my guest." And he went forward with 2 guns. He was in the command car, an M20 command car, and he started climbing the hill in the fog. And all of a sudden, all hell broke loose. And obviously the Germans knew that someone would try to advance from below in the valley. So they had infantry set in the woods, and they had 88 guns trained on that position. So when they entered about 700 yards away from the town, Charles's command car hit a mine, and he was blown out of the car. His men jumped into action. They were under immediate shelling, and as I said, all hell broke loose. But they were able to mount the guns, take out the infantry that was hidden in the woods, and fire counter-battery fire upon the German 88 guns in the town. Charles was shot, machine-gunned, actually, across his chest, but he refused to evacuate. And he commanded until he weakened so much that he finally had to transfer command to a junior officer, but he wouldn't leave. And his men, seeing him completely covered in blood, thought that he was near death, that he was going to die. But he did survive, and he was taken back to a hospital in England, then back to Detroit, where he was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. But his action was so heroic that his commander, Blackshear, who supported him with infantry later coming in from the side, said it was the most heroic action he had ever witnessed. And he's one of our 7 Black Medal of Honor winners. Excuse me, I don't say winners anymore, even though it's on the hardcover. It's recipients. So I'll move along to our next soldier. Vernon Baker was born in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and he was the first black soldier in his outfit, the 370th Infantry Division, to become a commissioned officer. He was a supplies sergeant, and he, in his book, Lasting Valor, he says he enjoyed that very much, and he wasn't looking for a promotion, but he was so good at his work that they sent him to Fort Benning and commissioned him, and he became commissioned as a second lieutenant in the 370th, which was part of the 92nd Division, and that division served in Italy under General Ned Almond, and Ned Almond was one of the, unfortunately, more racist white generals in the military, and you can look him up and read what his comments were about black soldiers. But it was difficult serving under Ned Almond, but Vernon always said he was just a soldier and he had a job to do. And his job was, which garnered him the Medal of Honor, was to lead his weapons platoon up 3 separate hills towards a castle stronghold that had been failed to be taken by the entire regiment. But he took his weapons platoon up and held his ground, took out several machine gun nests, a dugout, and several German soldiers to neutralize the position. But in doing so, he lost 19 of the 26 men that he took up that hill. And he was not in command of the unit because his company commander, John Runyon, had just come in from the States who had no combat. And he unfortunately retreated down the hill, leaving Vernon and the men to fend for themselves. And that, you can read in my book, that story. But Vernon ended up getting back down the hill, and as a result of his action, they were able to open up Highway 12 and break through the Gothic line. Finally, because they found out the next day the Germans had evacuated the castle stronghold that Vernon's men had attacked, but it was at a great cost. And Vernon of course, I want to mention that he was the only living recipient in 1997 to be able to accept the award in person at the White House ceremony. And in comments afterwards, he told CNN that I don't feel like a hero, I just feel like a soldier that did my job. He was a very humble man, and he served through Vietnam, actually, and afterwards with the Red Cross. He passed away in 2010 from cancer. I'm going to move on to Willie James now. Willie James was from Kansas City. He was the only child of widow Lillian James, and he entered combat in France in 1945 with Eisenhower's letter inviting black soldiers and service units to train in combat in white rifle companies, and this initiated the program of the 5th Platoon. Willie became one of their best shots in their unit. He was part of the 104th Division. His unit was the 413th Infantry Division, and he served as their lead scout. Their role was to push into German territory and clean out the stragglers, mainly SS troops who were holding the towns on the border. And he scouted in April of 1945, and he scouted this town called Lippoldsburg, and his commander, Armand Sarabella, sent him in to reconnoiter the town to see if there were Germans there. And indeed, he found that there were hardened SS soldiers in the town. So he came back and reported that he couldn't figure out how many, but there were soldiers, German soldiers there. So his commander, platoon commander Armand Sarabella, company commander, asked him to lead a column beside him, entering into the town, two columns separated. And as they entered the town, almost immediately, Armand was struck down by a German machine gun, and his photo is on the slide. You can see there. And Willie James rushed to his commander's aid, and unfortunately at that time he also became a target, and he was struck down right beside his commanding officer. And for that action, for his heroic, selfless action of trying to pull his commander's safety, he also was awarded the Medal of Honor. And I will move on to our next soldier, and that is Edward Carter Jr. And his photo graces the cover of the book. And Edward was is quite a individual. Everyone asked me about Edward Carter. Who is this guy? My response is he's a superhero. There's no other way to describe him. He was born in Los Angeles. Father was a missionary, and his wife was Anglo-Indian, and they moved to Calcutta in the mid-20s, and in 1927, after his mother left, unfortunately, the family, they moved to Shanghai, the international settlement in Shanghai. And Eddie, as he was called, attended the Shanghai Military Academy. And in 1932, when the Japanese attacked the international settlement, they, in all the confusion of the attack, Eddie decided he was going to help to fight against the Japanese invaders, and he went over to the Chinese 19th Army, and he did speak Chinese, but he requested to join the unit, and they were desperate for men in the trenches, so they said, he was 15, so they said, you know, if you can hold a rifle, shoot a rifle, come on in. So he joined the unit. He demonstrated such bravery in the month that he was with them that they were about to elevate him to a lieutenant. But his father, who had been searching for him for over a month, finally heard that he was with the Chinese 19th Army, and he came to collect him. And he told Eddie's commander that he was underage, and he was bringing him back home. But that didn't stop him from his military trajectory, if you will. He returned to Los Angeles. He joined the Merchant Marines for a short time, and then started reading about the Spanish Civil War, and decided to go over and fight with the Abraham Lincoln Brigade, which unfortunately at the time he didn't know was communist. He just knew that he wanted to fight fascism because he had seen in Shanghai what the result of that was. So he signed up and he fought with the Abraham Lincoln Brigade in the Spanish Civil War. And his comments were, he was surrounded by inexperienced, literary types who'd never held a gun. He was the most experienced soldier in the unit. And he survived that with a minor wound and got back to the States in the late 30s, early 1940s. And at that time, there was no work for young black men at all. So he ended up getting married, but he decided to join the military in September 1941, and he trained at Fort Benning. And he was part of a quartermaster truck company, but again, he was the most experienced soldier in their unit. He was written up in the Army Gazette for his marksmanship, and he was very frustrated that he couldn't even touch a gun. He was pushing a mop, he complained. And his quartermaster truck company ended up going over to France, and he kept petitioning the Army to allow him to join a combat unit. And finally, with Eisenhower's call for black soldiers and service units to join white rifle companies, he got his chance. And he joined the 12th Armored Division, which was Patton's Mystery Division, as people know. And he was part of the 56th Armored Infantry Battalion D Company. Their role was to enter unscouted territory in Germany, uncleared, unscouted, in these slow-moving convoys and clear out German stragglers. And, of course, they became targets of the Germans, who were hidden all over the place. And as their convoy was moving forward in March 1945, his convoy was attacked. March 12th, 1945. And he volunteered to lead a three-man unit across to this empty warehouse, which was firing on their convoy with an 88 and a machine gun nest. So it was almost a suicide mission. It was a suicide mission, essentially, because they decided they had to cross 150 yards of open ground towards this warehouse. And two of his men were shot down immediately, and then the third limped back. And Carter, who was so far ahead, couldn't turn around. He knew that he would be shot down as well. But he was ended up being shot 9 times in the arm, hand, leg, but he was carrying a Thompson submachine gun. And he hatched a plan that he knew the Germans would come out looking for him. And he hatched a plan that he would take his Thompson submachine gun and plant it on the ground, push himself up, and take the patrol out when they came looking for him. And that's exactly what happened. He waited 2 hours in this tall grass, and he heard the Germans coming. And when they got close enough, he planted his Thompson submachine gun, took out 6 of this 8 German soldier patrol, and the other 2 raised their hands in surrender. And at that point, what he did was superhuman. With 9 wounds, he took one German soldier, put him in front of him, another one, put him behind him, and backed 150 yards back across towards his convoy. And you can imagine that the soldiers on both sides were just looking on in awe. And he took these 2 prisoners back to his convoy, and his commanding officer said, "Okay, great, that's incredible. We've got to get you, evacuated." And he said, "Wait, no. These men have to be interrogated." He said, "We don't speak German." And again, once again, his military training in Shanghai helped him. He spoke German. So he started interrogating these 2 German soldiers in German about what lay up ahead for the convoy. And they gave him all this intelligence of the hidden snipers and machine guns. So his convoy was able to proceed in safety forward and clear more areas. And everyone was so amazed at what he had done. And he ended up being sent to a hospital in Luxembourg and rejoined his unit a short time later. And that's why I call him a superhero, because he was just beyond amazing in what he did, and why we selected him for the cover. I'll move on to George Watson. George Watson was born in Starkville, Mississippi in 1915, and ended up moving in with his grandmother in Birmingham. And then he married a woman, Nanny Hood, and attended college in Fort Collins, Colorado, and then was drafted and sent to Fort Camp Lee, Virginia. It was called Camp Lee at the time, in the 29th Quartermaster Regiment, 2nd Battalion. And he trained as what they call a laundry specialist. So he's doing the laundry for all the service members. And he became involved with Operation Lilliput in December 1942, which was a ship armada convoy from Australia to New Guinea. And he was on a ship called the UST Jacob. The Japanese in that December decided to come in and dive bomb his ship on March 8th, 1943, just after 1 o'clock. There were 9 Japanese G4M1 Betty bombers and 12 fighters, and his ship was hit by 3 bombs and immediately engulfed in flames. And it was a Dutch freighter, and the Dutch captain ordered everyone overboard. And George was only one of the few soldiers who could swim, and swim well. So there were rafts in the water, but he decided to start bringing men back to these rafts and trying to save as many men as he could. He saw one man close to the ship floundering, and he decided to save this one last man who was close to the ship, but it was too late. The ship was just about to go under the sea, under the waves, and when it did, it created a vortex which sucked George and this other soldier down with it, and he was lost and drowned. And his heroism was witnessed by everyone, obviously, including his commander, and he was immediately written up for the Distinguished Service Cross. And George was the first black soldier in World War II to receive the DSC in World War II, which is amazing. And he, of course, was finally awarded Medal of Honor in 1997 by Sergeant Major of the Army Gene McKinney. Accepted it for the family. Moving on to Reuben Rivers, who I mentioned earlier, he received the Silver Star for his action in combat. He was part of the 761st Tank Battalion that trained at Camp Claiborne, and he was a dedicated warrior, and his convoy was stopped by a mined tree across the road, so he decided on his own initiative, he was back in the column in his tank, to come back around in his Sherman and clear this mine under enemy fire. And he pulled this mine off the road, and his convoy, his column, was able to advance further. And he became the lead tanker in his unit, which was Able Company. His commander put him in that role, is Captain David Williams. Reuben ended up going over a railroad crossing, and his tank hit a teller mine and spun his tank around, and he became seriously injured, but he refused to evacuate. And Captain Williams urged him to evacuate, but he refused because he said that they would need him moving as they went further. And so he wouldn't leave, even though he could. He was seriously wounded, and his wound was getting gangrenous. The medic evaluated that. And then they were finally advancing forward several days after his tank was hit by a mine. He grabbed another tank and was entering a town called Goobling, and they didn't know until the last minute that this town was protected by 75 millimeter anti-tank guns, German guns. And his last call over the radio to Captain Williams was, "I see him, I'm going to fight him." And then the 75 millimeter gun, one or two of them, smashed into his tank and split in half. And he died immediately. His crew, he and his crew. And Captain Williams refused, this is what's interesting about the story, he refused to submit him for the DSC. He wanted him to be awarded the Medal of Honor. His commander, Hollis Hunt, said he'd see what he could do, but he wasn't sure if he could get it through. But Captain Williams never gave up. He petitioned the Army, and actually during the Shaw study in 1993, he petitioned them that even though Reuben hadn't received the DSC, he had received the Silver Star, and he deserved the Medal of Honor. And they agreed. And he became one of the 7 Medal of Honor recipients in 1997. And Captain Williams was able to attend that Medal of Honor ceremony. And he gave an interview with the Baltimore Sun after the event, and he was very emotional. He said that you don't understand that when men fight together, they become blood brothers. That's what we were. We were blood brothers. He also added that now he could die in peace. The deed was done. His goal of achieving the Medal of Honor for Reuben was done. And just such an amazing story. And my final Medal of Honor recipient, and the final one in the book, is John Fox. John was from Woodlawn, Ohio, and he was accepted into Ohio State, but he decided to transfer to Wilberforce University because he really wanted to pursue a career in the military. And that was only one of 3 black colleges in the United States that offered ROTC. And he was determined that he would join the military. And he came out of ROTC in 1941, and he joined the newly activated 366 Infantry Regiment at Fort Devens, Massachusetts, and became commander of Cannon Company. The 366 became part of the 92nd Division, and he trained prior to Christmas 1944 on forward observation duties. He volunteered. He didn't have to do it. He wasn't next in line to take the holiday assignment over Christmas, but he decided to take on this post as forward observer in this town in Tuscany, Somma Colonia. And his post was in a 47-foot stone medieval tower that overlooked the town. And the town was defended by 75 of the 366th Infantry and 25 Italian partisans. But what they didn't know was the Germans were planning to surround them, which they did, and they outnumbered them 3-1, and they decided to take the town. And the day after Christmas, they attacked. And they attacked at 4:30 with an opening salvo of artillery, which, of course, woke everybody up. And John was on duty, and he called back for counter battery fire. But the German artillery died right away. And everyone sensed that something was up. And then a couple hours later, around 7, the artillery began again, and for an hour, really devastating artillery. And John continued to call in counter battery fire. And around 10:30 in the morning, the artillery stopped, and the Germans, who were mainly Austrian troops, surrounded the town and overwhelmed them. John could see down from his post in the tower that it had resorted to hand-to-hand combat, and they were being overwhelmed. So he called back to his fire control center and directed artillery fire at first on the outskirts, but then he said, "There's too many of them. There's more of them than there are of us." And he gave them the coordinates for his position. And at first they refused to fire on his position, and he demanded that they did. And his commander, Colonel Ross, said, "I have to take this upstairs." And he took it to the request to General Truscott, who approved the request to fire on John Fox's position. And John called in 2 salvos of fire, coordinating fire to locate his position. So we actually called in the artillery and adjusting fire to get to his position. And they ended up on the 3rd salvo firing all batteries, which included his cannon company battery, as a matter of fact, on his position, and he perished in that artillery strike. The Americans only a few days later ended up retaking the town, but his heroic action was so incredible that Colonel Ross asked for a minute of silence after that salvo. John received the Distinguished Service Cross in 1982, which was received by his wife Arlene, and in 1997 he was one of the 7 Black Medal of Honor recipients to receive the Medal of Honor for his actions in World War II. And those are the 7 Medal of Honor recipients of World War II, and you can read about them in my book, Immortal, Valor, and or pick up the audiobook and listen to it. And also you can check out my podcast, Point of the Spear. But I'd like to turn it over to your questions now. Good morning, Alex. How are you?
I'm good. Where are you joining us from?
I am in Atlanta. Yes, that's my residence.
You grew up in Connecticut, yeah?
Yeah, I did. I grew up in Connecticut, went to school in Massachusetts, and now I'm a Southerner.
You don't have me convinced for a second. But
What's
bless
that?
your heart. Bless your heart. You're not convincing at all, but anyway.
Yeah, well, I know you're in Georgia as well. Not right now.
No. I defected from the South. I've moved to DC, so I guess I still in the South, but anyway.
Okay.
Wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
First thing that I wanted to ask you is, you've written 2 books now. Your last 2 books have been about Black Americans in World War II. Why? Big question, why?
Well, Um, I did a film in 2011 that was actually nominated for an Emmy called The Worth 11, and that was about a black soldiers who were massacred during the Battle of the Bulge, actually. Um, and that film aired on National Geographic. And a few years later, I was contacted by an author to co-author a book about that, which came out in 2017 called The Lost 11.
Yeah.
And it's about that story and those men. And when I was doing the research for The Worth 11, I just discovered all these stories that were seemingly just lying there untold. And I tell so many people that it's a treasure trove of stories from World War II for Black soldiers.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about my next book after The Lost 11. And I was speaking with one of the reenactor coordinators I worked with. And we came up with the idea for the Medal of Honor recipients of World War II. And it seemed like the natural way to go, but there was really almost no information on some of these men. So it was a real research project, but it was fun. But it was just, there were so many stories that needed to be told.
So, you mentioned over a million Black Americans in service in World War II and not one single Medal of Honor recipient. Thank you for not saying winner, because
Mm-hmm.
that annoys some people. But anyway, not one recipient. Is this just complete blatant racism, or is there something
Yes.
else going on here? It's just flat out racism, yeah?
Yes, it's in the book. You know, I didn't want to make a sweeping statement about that. Oh, it's racism, but it was discovered in the Shaw study. Uh, prof, Professor Jill Brand discovered that it was an unspoken rule in World War II that white commanders would not recommend
Right.
their black soldiers for the Medal of Honor, no matter what they did. So um, they were submitted, their names were submitted for the DSC. So Captain Williams, who was Reuben Rivers' commander, refused to do that. And um, that's why I brought that out. Reuben had been awarded the Silver Star, but it was racism. Yep, institutional.
So, what drew you in particular to the stories of Black Americans in World War II?
Um, I just think that when I did the Worth 11, I just built such a connection with those men. I went to their graves in Europe. You know, I met with the family members. I could see, you know, the pain was still there of what was done to these men. I felt like I wanted to carry on and tell more stories about black soldiers. And there's more stories to tell.
We have a question here from Blaine, and she says, "Are there others still under consideration for the Medal of Honor?"
Yes, as a matter of fact, there are. And I mentioned them at the end of my book. There's actually two petitions currently. One is for Dory Miller, who served in the Pacific during the Pearl Harbor attack. He was a messman's mate, and he was from Waco, Texas. And he took over a 50 caliber gun on the ship. I believe it was the West Virginia, and took out 3 or 4 Japanese dive bombers. And he had no training on the 50 caliber. And what's interesting about Dory is a lot of people know his story, I'm sure, but his commanding officer, he helped carry his commanding officer who was incapacitated off the ship. He literally helped, you know, carry the stretcher out, and his commanding officer received the Medal of Honor. So there's Dory Miller. And the second man soldier is Waverly Woodson, who was a medic. I believe it was the 320th. I'm not certain, but he served as a medic on the beach at D-Day. I'm not sure if it was Omaha or Utah, but he served as a medic for over 30 hours and treated over 200 wounded soldiers. And after 30 hours, he collapsed. So he's also in contention for the Medal of Honor. I don't know where those two petitions stand, though.
We have a question from Colin. Did any black soldiers fight in Operation Market Garden?
I don't know.
Yeah.
That's a good question. There were black field artillery battalions, which I write about. But that was, as you know, mainly an airborne mission. Yeah. So I'm not certain. That's a good question.
So I want to ask you, without jumping books too much, but I'm going to anyway because it's that time of year. I want to ask you about the Wereth 11. For those people joining us that don't know this story, can you take us through it quickly? Because, it's 79 years tomorrow that the famous Malmedy massacre occurred, perhaps the most notorious massacre of World War II in the European theater anyway. And at the very same time, almost to the minute, you have what happened to the Wereth 11, which, very few people know about, but in some ways was just as affecting and brutal. Can you tell us about the Wereth 11, please? That would be great, because it's that time of year,
Sure. I mean, it's perfect for this time of year. The Wereth 11 were 11 soldiers who were part of the 333rd Field Artillery Battalion who trained in Oklahoma. And they were assigned during the Battle of the Bulge to the Ghost Front, which people know that term. It was the border of Belgium and Germany, and they were assigned there because Allied commanders thought that was the quiet sector. Right. But they were stationed 6 kilometers from the border in Schoenberg, Belgium, which I've been to. And when the Battle of the Bulge erupted in the artillery salvo, their position was basically ground zero. And they had four 155 howitzers, which they returned counter battery fire on the border to the advancing Germans. And after a day and a half or so, after the 16th, they ran out of ammunition, and they were overwhelmed and surrounded by the advancing German infantry, and it resorted to hand-to-hand combat. Many were killed, and some were evacuated, but not many. And they were taken prisoner to head back to Germany. So they were part of a column of prisoners heading back to Germany on, I believe it was the 17th of December. And during that time, as people know, American planes, Allied planes weren't in the air. So the Germans kind of had free reign. But the skies cleared a little bit, and the American P-47s took to the sky, and one of them zeroed in on the column where these soldiers, these 11 soldiers, were being marched back to Germany. They strafed the column, and in the confusion, these 11 men escaped and headed northward in the woods. And everyone knows that was a really cold winter, and there was snow on the ground. So they headed north after that strafing for about 10 kilometers to a town called Wereth. And Wereth has not grown since 1944. It's still about 9 houses. And
yeah,
9 houses and
I'm not going to interrupt you too much, Robert, but I've actually been to the memorial to the Wereth 11. I think I've been there 4 or 5 times, and we have someone here who's pointing out Wesley said that he'd been to the site of the Wereth 11 about 20 years ago, and he said he's really glad that he saw your film about them. You've made some fantastic films, by the way. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And then we have Kyle, who says, kudos to us, friends of the World War II Memorial, National World War II Memorial. Thanks for your presentation. Having read my book, Against All Odds, about the Medal of Honor recipients from the Third ID, Kyle said it was great to hear you talk about the Black Americans, African Americans who received that same award way too late. So going back to the Wereth 11, and I only have about 4 minutes left, and going back to the Wereth 11, here you have another example of Black Americans, this time the victims of an atrocity. There was an investigation into the Malmedy massacre, which, upwards of 100 white Americans were massacred. But here you have Black Americans massacred, and nothing happens. It's, there's no result. Nothing happens. Why?
Well, I know you're crunched for time. I can compress it. The 11 soldiers were taken in by a farmer into a house who sheltered them, fed them, and a SS patrol came along later and knocked on the door because they were informed that they were Black soldiers in this house. They rousted them out, marched them down the road, and brutally massacred them and tortured them for absolutely no reason. It was a war crime. And they left their bodies in the snow. Townspeople in Wereth found the bodies when the snow cleared, and the Army did an investigation. There was an investigation into the massacre, but it was closed 2 years later, saying there wasn't enough evidence to charge. It just wasn't clear who was responsible for the massacre. But that's what happened.
So we have a question from Pat Jernigan. Is your film available? How can people get to see your films, Robert?
Oh yeah, they're all on Amazon Prime. Wereth 11 is on the Roku channel. They're just type in Wereth 11 and it'll come up. I believe it was on Netflix for a short time. Military Channel has it, so it's easy to find. And my other films are easy to find as well.
I want to ask you one last question, because I've known you on and off for quite a long time. It seems like an awful long time, but anyway. Today, as we try and imagine what it's like in the Ardennes right now, with thousands of Americans being taken prisoner, the 106th Infantry Division is about to lose 6,000 men, one of the greatest mass surrenders in military history. My guys in the longest winter, the most decorated platoon of World War II, are literally fighting to their last bullets as I speak to you now, making a huge difference. So can you tell us why World War II fascinates you so much, and why you have such great passion for the so-called greatest generation on this, very special anniversary day?
I think because if you meet a World War II veteran, they are a breed apart. They are humble heroes that have a bearing that you do not see today. They are a breed apart. And I admire our veterans so enormously that you just feel compelled to tell their stories. And it's recent history. Like, I was over in that area in the Prumberberg Forest in Belgium, just outside St. Vith, when we were filming the Wereth 11. And you can look down, and we did find a magazine, a cartridge.
Yep. No,
you can still find it.
It's very much alive. We're hoping to go to the exact spot that you're talking about, friends on a trip in the fall. On that note, Robert, can I just say thank you so much for your time, awesome presentation, and your work for many years has been exemplary. And I just thank you so much for being with us here today.
Humbled and honored, Alex. Thank you. And thank you to everyone.
Our pleasure. We're going to take a break now. We'll be back at 11 with Danny Parker, who I think Robert would agree is like probably the leading expert on the Battle of the Bulge.
Absolutely.
Happening right now, 79 years ago. So we'll have Danny Parker joining us at 11. And then don't miss at 12, we're going to have, I think, the greatest, or rather most articulate eyewitness to the liberation of Dachau concentration camp, a superstar of those last of the greatest generation, Dan Doherty joining us. That'll be amazing. So thank you again, Robert, and join us again soon.
My pleasure. Thank you.